Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Qualley. Today we have a very special guest, my posing coach, Brett Riffel. And I'm super pumped to have him on, especially post-show, because I got to go through this huge evolution. He got to watch me go through it as well. And I get to really get some advice from someone who has so many other prep clients and has been doing this for so many years. And he's done and great success with his own protocol. And we'll talk about within the show his own experience as he's been in the industry since he was like 20. And we'll talk about that. We talk about really a lot of details in there, how he evolves clients, how he preps them. And we talk about the unhealthy part about bodybuilding within the really hard prep stuff. And then we even dive into my physique. We dive into my criticisms and how I can build off. And you'll see he's quite encouraging as far as keeping me in the sport in some way. And I got to say, maybe just because I'm constantly in this post-show buzz, that I am more open to doing doing another show in the future. So I don't want to waste any more time in this intro. I want you to dive right into this because it's a long episode. And we're even going to have a part two, as you'll see that he had to run because we just got so caught up in this. This is already a longer episode, so we have a lot that we get to dive into. So without further ado, here is Brett Riffel. Good day, Brett. How are you, sir?
I am doing fabulous. How are you?
I'm not too shabby. We're just a couple weeks out from the competition, and what a crazy weekend it was for you. As hard as it is on me, I saw the stress on your face. How many competitors did you have at that competition?
15 athletes.
15 athletes. And, I just know from being a coach, if you have like three or four, you're worried about three or four at a competition. And to have 15 people who are doing like one of the most challenging, stressful thing in their life, relying on you, guiding you through it, that is very stressful. So I can totally appreciate and value what you went through there. You had a game face on. It was really cool because I could just see how much you love it. But let's kind of dive into why you love it. Like, because this is I want to know your story. I give a very mild introduction at the start. I know you're my posing coach, but let's start all the way back. How did you get into bodybuilding? Tell people about yourself, how you got into that sport, and your own experience in the competition.
Totally. Perfect. First of all, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to, talk about myself, talk about my history of competing, my athletes, how the show went, and dive in a little bit about you as well. I'm excited about that. But to kind of start the story off for myself is it starts back, I guess, when I was younger. I was always an athlete growing up. Played, every single sport that the school would offer. That's basketball, volley, badminton, cross country, track and field. But my main sport was baseball, and that's kind of what I played at a very high level all my years growing up, right until I want to say 20 or 21, somewhere in that time frame. And right around post high school, I went to the University of Winnipeg. And to be honest, I wasn't the best student at first. I would be spending more of my time working out, or playing basketball in the gym, or playing squash or racquetball at the U of W's Duff Center. And what I was kind of missing is that competitive nature that I had, not from playing high school sports, and missing that, right? So I got into a lot of working out, and as soon as I found the gym, I actually fell in love with the gym and working out a lot more than the sports I actually played growing up. So more than baseball, more than volleyball, more than basketball. I actually stopped playing those sports, which looking back, like, you would think it was a really hard decision. And still to this day, my parents ask me, like, do you ever miss playing those sports? And the truth is I don't. I think the passion that I had from sports playing transitioned straight to weightlifting and working out. And as most people do when they work out, is there's always a reason that someone starts to work out. Is maybe it's they're too small, or maybe that they're overweight, or maybe they're not the most outgoing person, or they don't like how they look, or they got picked on when they're younger, everything like that. I wouldn't say I had a specific reason to start out, but I would say I was probably a mixture of all those grouped together in a little bit. And then naturally with working out is led to doing a bodybuilding show. And a couple of my stepbrothers' best friends competing in a bodybuilding show that I saw. And I was like, you know what? I'd like to do that one day. And that led me to prep for my first bodybuilding show when I was 20.
That's it's a pretty young age to get into it, but that
Yes.
shows a real big passion for it, and you can totally see this in some people where they're so interested and passionate. What's the client that I know of yours, that younger guy? I always forget his name.
Yannick?
Yannick.
Yeah.
Yannick is young. He did it when he was in high school, and you can see now he
Mhm.
just like he loves the posing. He's so into it. He like
Yes.
idolizes it. Like this is like how I used to look at boxing, and that
Totally.
passion that comes out is super cool. And when you kind of like to have the idea of bodybuilding and to go to that far extreme fitness and be like, I'm 20, I'm going to go for it. I think that's so cool because it took me until I was like 30 to go for one
Mm.
because they terrified me because of how extreme it is. But, once you go through it, it's an incredible experience. And so I totally know too the evolution of like trying to find an adult competitive
Yes.
pursuit is actually quite challenging because if you like hockey or baseball, you can find some pickup sports, but it kind of works, but it's not the same. You can only go so hard, and
Mhm.
those hockey's high contacts, and with baseball it doesn't end up being as highly competitive. And
Correct.
so when you have something like bodybuilding, like it's fucking competitive, like you're going
It
really
is.
hard.
Totally.
And so and also how it's both difficult for your life, but it fits your life, right? It's about your
Mhm.
lifestyle challenge that you can actually
Totally.
do consistently. So I really think that's what I even loved about it was so simplistic as far as live a fucking really healthy life, but
It
then
gives
go
you structure, right?
crusher. Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to get into it, like I said, at a young age, and not a lot of people do, but where I found is, at those years after high school, right? 19, 20, 21, 22, or whatever you say is years you're trying to find out who you are, right?
Totally.
And you go through so many different personality traits or ideas that you think, I'm going to try X, Y, and Z to find your right path.
Hmm.
And why I thought bodybuilding was so great is because it gave me so much structure and taught me to be like disciplined, work hard, and not only in the gym, but in other areas of my life.
Oh man, I'm way less structured now that the show is done. Like I try to keep
Yes,
structured.
totally.
When you only have 4 or 5 hours a day that you can get work done, and the rest of it's committed to bodybuilding, you're like, you got to fucking get to work. Let's get this done. And
Totally.
now it's like, I do have some of the reverse dieting protocol and all that stuff, but now I'm like less urgent. And so like, I'm just like, when you're in this, I call it the discipline zone. It's like blinders on. It's just like, there's nothing that matters other than the task at hand. And
Mhm.
every time I was doing that in boxing initially, boxing was with blinders on. I was my best self. And the
Mhm.
whole mantra of my podcast and my program, I tell my clients is, you're actually really happier than you think you are if you embrace it. This is the best version of yourself. So
Totally.
it's not the pursuit of happiness; it's happiness within pursuit. If you like, this is where I am my best self, and you embrace that challenge, totally evolves the way that you look at these things. And I'm really curious how that first show went for you, and how you evolve later on in your career as a bodybuilder.
First show was great. It was definitely a learning experience to say the least. Like very hard, of course. Like any sort of bodybuilding show, you're hungry, you're tired, you're depleted, and you're pushing yourself to your absolute max to bring your best. But not only that, you're nervous too, right? Especially
Mhm.
being your first show. I didn't know what to expect, and coaching athletes, especially now first time, I'm so glad that I felt that nervous in my first show, like all those emotions, because I'm better to articulate what they're going to feel and how to guide them through it better, right? If I wasn't nervous, I wouldn't be as good coach as I am today for those first time people.
Right.
Uh, but actually, for my first show, just to date that back, 2016 was my first show. I was actually going to do the March show. So at that time in Manitoba, we had March, May, and October. We had 3 shows. And I was actually going to do the March show in men's physique was my initial goal of seeing, I was like, I really love men's physique. It was more what everybody's doing on YouTube or Instagram, social media at that time, still at an early age. And to be honest, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready physically. I wasn't ready mentally. And 8 weeks out, I pulled up and I said, I need more time to build. I need more time to prepare myself mentally So I sat down with my coach and said, hey, you know what? I still want to compete. This is just not the right time for me. Can we continue, you know what, improving myself? And we push the date to October show.
Yeah, that's a really good call as far as the building, because that was the big thing. I made a mistake on my first show was, I just looked at it as a cutting competition and thought wherever my build was, it was going to be. And it's like, yeah, you had, not good shoulders, not a lot of back muscle size. And it's like, there was no build phase. And like, it's so kind of stupid that they always call it the off season in bodybuilding.
Yes.
It's like, call it the build season. Like, don't call it an off season is like, 2 to 3 months after your reverse diet. But like, if you're calling the build season off season, like, sort of people don't understand that the preparation is just so that you show what all the building is about. You just need to be as lean as possible for that proof, right?
Improvements from year to year. Like you see guys that improve their stage weight, improve their conditioning, and their look overall from year to year. It's not the improvements that they're making during prep for that 16, 20 weeks. It's in the off season for their improvements.
Right.
And you're right. You know what? You've heard different things: off season, improvement season, build season, everything like that. And it's very easy to be motivated post show for a lot of clients and be like, hey, you know what? Can't wait to do the next show next year. I'm motivated for a month after the show, and they're gun ho, right? But okay, 2 months pass, 3 months pass, 4 months pass, and that motivation starts to go down further and further. That's actually where the gains are made.
Right. No, and that's very true, because we were just talking before is like, I'm like feeling more of that buzz still because, it went well. And it's like, it's good that you gave me that heads up because I got it. And I also said to myself, like, see how you feel in a year or 2 to 3 years. Because all those things that you said, like, mentally prepare yourself for a physical and emotional time commitment that, at the start of it isn't crazy, but it's still a lot of time. And then at the end of it, it's going to test your soul. And so it's like it's going to test your social environment. Like, you have to have supportive people in your environment that are going to understand, I can't eat here. We can do this. I'm not going to have energy for this. I might be irritable. And so all these things are inevitable. So, that idea of like pulling out to make sure you're readjusted, I think it was a very logical one. I know in 2021, when I went to do one and I made the mistake of thinking I could prep without a coach, was like, I was, because they kept moving the goalposts in 21, as you know. And so it was like kept moving. And then I was like, okay, well, where am I going with this? And it was actually a really good encouragement from my friend Quinn, who had kind of said, like, he was humming and hawing about it. And he's like, dude, if you're going to do your next show, fucking win. Like, don't go in half-assed. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. I'm not ready for that mental commitment right now. So I'm going to make sure I take my time, make sure it's a good year for me to do it. And, in this last year is the right calling. So that idea of making sure you're physically built and ready for it is imperative. So I really love that. And so you did how many more shows after that?
I did 2018 after that. So I took about a year off and grew quite a bit in terms of the comparison. My stage weight was actually, thinking back, it was only like a 4-pound increase, but I was way more conditioned. Way leaner and harder overall from there, but only 4 pounds. And then in 2019, I did MABA show, which actually won the overall in Classic. And then I went on to the CPA, which was a week later, the Van Dyke Classic, and won my class there.
Yeah, and I think that was the year we were at the same show there. And
Correct.
Yeah, terrific physique. And you thought about maybe doing another one in the future?
Yeah, I definitely want to. Is what's kind of, I guess, stopped me or stuff is like that is in those years is because I did compete so early on in my life that, like we've talked about, competing takes a lot of time and effort, that I put a lot of other things on the back burner that I needed to catch up in the past few years of, finances, getting my own place, everything, getting into a relationship. The pandemic obviously was a factor as well. And then most importantly, starting my coaching business. And you know what, truthfully, I love coaching more than competing myself, but still, I would still like to compete again.
Yeah. And the thing that this kind of reminds me of my story in boxing, where like when you get into it and it's like it just totally engrosses you. You're so driven. Like
Mm.
it is that eye of the tiger. If you've seen Rocky, it's
Yes.
you just totally, and you see that in boxers when people have the eye of the tiger, they're fucking obsessed over this thing, and they'll watch documentaries on it, they'll watch the pros on it. And that's exactly who I was. And anyone who's in boxing, I always tell them, it's like you have to be obsessed. And it is important to have things outside of that, but that's what actually is going to make sure you push yourself and commit to it. Now, when you take a step back from that, like you say, that after buzz, and I had coached some guys in the fall towards some fights for boxing, and it was both their first fights, and it was like, oh no, I'm coming back, and I just knew they weren't, because it was like it's hard. It's so fucking hard to commit your life to these things. And for myself, it was like as soon as I could get engrossed in my work, and it was taking my hours, and it was also giving me the fulfillment that sport was, it becomes really hard to then try to shift back into that competitive mindset mode and be almost, because you have to be like selfish, and you have to be like, my business is actually going to take a hit. And the good thing is with you and I is that being coaches, that like this is our industry, it does benefit your business, right? I give so much credit to people who do this as like a side pursuit. I'm like, fuck, like this is so easily my life. And so for you to do any 9 to 5 job or any other basic job, and then to say, I'm going to go get jacked and shredded, I'm like, you inspire me, because like I do this almost out of a duty and responsibility, more than anything. So I think it's pretty incredible. But let's talk about the prep, because this is what I'm, you always gave me such great advice. And, a good quarter to half of our conversations while we were closing was like, hey, what are you doing for this and that? And so I would love to know, and totally blanket statement that, it depends on the client.
Yes.
But what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of a thought process of maybe using me as your experimental, beginner. So we have a little bit more specificity. And I'll also talk about how I had some different things, and we can see how our approaches were different, how you would treat me different. And then that way we can kind of get a sense of how you kind of go through the whole prep phase. So like I mentioned, we'll talk building in the future, but let's talk prep. So we're about, normally where do you encourage people to start a prep? Is it like, do you have a hard number? Do you have a rough number? How many months out that you would want the client to start cutting and coming out of a build phase?
Great question. Great question. Honestly, I love to work with people as long as possible is number one. It's a very generic answer, but the more I can work with someone in terms of length of period, more I'm going to be able to learn their body, more I'm going to be able to know how certain foods react, but not only in terms of nutrition or training, I get to know how that client communicates with me and how I communicate with that client. We find the correct communication that works for both of us. Plus, two, their motivation factors. Not everybody's motivated the same way, or how I communicate from client to client is completely different. Some people need, a little bit of a softer approach. Some people need a harder approach. Some people can be, I tell them one thing and they'll do it. Other ones you have to follow up on them. Everybody's a little bit different. But to answer your question, I would like to start ideally a minimum of a 16-week cut, to be honest. But if I can get them for 20 to 24 weeks, ideally beforehand, and put them into a primer phase, what I call it. So to prime their body for fat loss, right, is depending on the client and what they come to you is, maybe they have a damaged metabolic rate. Maybe they don't have healthy habits developed enough to actually stay in a deficit of calories. So what I mean by that is maybe they've been yo-yo dieting and their metabolism is up, down, up, down. I got to ensure that they're consuming enough calories that I can have room to cut calories from when we do start the prep. And also ensure that they're have the habits in place. So making sure they're drinking their water daily, making sure they can go for sure a couple of weeks without a cheat meal, making sure that they're going to the gym consistently, they can do their cardio, they know how to meal prep, basic stuff that people kind of forget about and take for granted. I need those to be shown to me before I'll say, okay, we can put you in a contest prep. Because if I don't, I'm just setting you up for failure.
Well, I love that you address, like, you know, if you have someone comes to you and, you know, they're like, hey, I want to get ready for a show. It's 16 weeks
Yeah,
out. And it's like, okay, tell me your history of eating in the last 2 months. And
totally,
they describe yo-yo dieting. And right away it's like, well, this is gonna be a fucking shit show because you're just
totally.
gonna you're gonna actually rock your metabolism, you're gonna rock yourself psychologically, and you're gonna completely fling back. So
Mhm.
I love that you address that because people don't realize even the 12 weeks is the longest that most average population should even be in a deficit
Correct.
without taking a break. And then you actually have to push harder for the show. So, you know, like having that metabolism and body healthy first is so
Mhm.
imperative.
And it's huge to have like a longer prep. Yeah, you know what? It's longer in a deficit, but you can implement diet breaks. You can implement more refeeds. You can, be ready early and potentially run a mock peak week or reverse diet a client into the show. Like there's so many different variables or techniques, I should say, that you can use when you have more time. And that's what I'm
Absolutely.
stressing to people so much is if you're listening to this and you want to compete, and you're thinking, okay, I only need 16 weeks with a coach, hire them a month or two early. I guarantee you're going to get better results and better coaching as well.
I would even implore them to do at least 2 months prior to the prep so that you can have
Yes,
even a
yes,
mini build phase. Like
totally.
if you
Yeah.
really want to do it, like I would say ideally 8 months, but like, you know, if you're really committed, let's say you're good training, got good strength and
Mhm.
size already, and you think you have a good setup. But even then, like one of the things you addressed on me right away was, hey, we got to bring up your lats and hamstrings. It's like, wow. I just built my body up in a balanced set. And it's like, it should have occurred to me to ask someone where are
Totally.
my imbalances because I couldn't see it or I didn't think of addressing it when I had the most available resources to do so,
Yes.
which is more calories. So that's a really good stance. So let's say you had me right around we could say week 16 7. I was 17 weeks out.
Mhm.
And I was coming off of around 27 to, I'd say my calorie maintenance was around 3,000.
Okay.
But I would go around 3,000 to 2,700 calories, ebb and flow within there. What would be the next step for you from around week 17?
First, before adjust your diet or your calories or anything like that, I would just naturally improve your movement. Basically, get your step count up naturally. Say you're at 10,000 steps a day. Okay, increase that by 1,000. Number one, okay, talk about intensity of workouts and what are planned that month for progressive overload. And you know what? Number one is to look at your food quality that you're having. So, it's not all about calories in, calories out. You know how, especially with YouTube nowadays, if it fits in your macros, is Skittles is the same thing as rice or something like that. I'm totally against that. I big thing is food quality, because as soon as you improve the food quality, you're going to actually move more. You're going to feel more energetic, and your totally daily expenditure goes up.
Right. And so I think we talked about this and we can hit this
Yeah.
off the head because I had a note on this. Do you go zero treat meals the whole 16 weeks or do you allow some here or there, like doesn't have to be weekly, some here or there? Like what's your addressing? Because like, yeah,
It's actually different for each client.
makes sense.
A couple of things is depending on how much the client has to lose. Ideally, I would not like to go a full 16 weeks without any cheat meals or refeeds or diet breaks. I think those are necessary to be included. Some clients are, definitely getting maybe just more refeed of the same food that's on their diet. Some might have specific cheat meals such as sushi or Five Guys that, we know it digests well. We know the response to it. And it's something that they really enjoy. And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum is, if I give someone a cheat meal, is, okay, I say, go have Five Guys, get a burger and a medium fry. But that burger and medium fry turns into 3 blizzards later.
Right.
And that's the big thing. So you have to have that trust with the client to be able to adhere to it.
Totally fair. Like it always comes down to it always comes down to the statement. It depends. So I love that you address it that way, and you got to make that protocol fit the client. Like I know
Exactly.
we're working with some people, and even myself. Like sometimes it was a treat meal, but it wasn't necessarily junk food. It was like we're gonna have a big steak. And we had like the one time what I called a treat meal was everything fit my calories, and they were all inherently whole foods except for the one thing I'd put. It was dark chocolate, like sweeter dark chocolate into a protein fruit dip, but it was like enough. And I've found like some weeks and some cuts for myself where I'm like, I want to treat every other week. Like I want to get momentum mentally, and then you actually allow that reintroduction, because some people don't have a healthy, like you mentioned, like they just don't have a healthy relationship with these foods. So you have to be able to give them a concept that, like, you know, if you're in, and that's the big thing that I'm trying to help my clients with, was this prep for myself, was anytime you do it, it's a big deal. You're doing it just to the idea of like care about the food experience. Like you don't just eat mindlessly. You don't order Five Guys and then watch TV. If you're not willing to sit down and just enjoy that meal and like be very mindful during that meal, it's going to be kind of a waste of an experience, because that's all that food's doing for you, is giving you a good experience. So that's mainly what it does, right? So I love that you have a different addressing. So let's come back to that plan. So you're saying we address the training, and let's dive into the training a little bit. So you know, they potentially came off a build phase of some sort. Now, roughly, you know, how many days a week? Let's talk about me specifically. How many days a week would you get someone like me strength training, and what would be your typically splits, kind of reps and sets?
So everything's going to be 5 days a week for training. I really am going to emphasize rest days. Especially at the beginning of prep too, right? Is I want to make as much progress and have as least stress on the body at the beginning, especially because I think you're going to have an easier time week after week, because no matter if your calories are high, no matter if your cardio is low and everything is good, every week in a deficit does compound to be a stress on your body, and you do feel it week after week. In terms of splits, it's different for every client. And I assess that first and foremost of, okay, you know what, we need to bring up your back, we need to bring up your hamstrings, we need to bring up your quads, whatever the body part is, we need to address that as, you know, maybe being trained twice a week or being focused on high carb days, whatever the program is set up. But I think that's step one, is having your clients hit the poses, even if they don't know how to pose at that beginning of prep. That's not so important, but seeing them in the poses as having a trained eye, you can see what needs improvement. And even sitting down and asking, you know what, when you train back or when you train chest, what do you feel like? Do you get a good pump? Do you feel a lot of contractions? And start to understand where their mind to muscle connection is with each muscle group. And I think that's an easy way to tell is, okay, you know what, we're going to have issues with maybe a lacking back later on in prep. So we need to focus on that with calories high.
Right. Yeah. No, again, it definitely depends, especially when the muscles are in balance. And you also address, like, what matters is what you look like on stage, right? So like whenever I sent the posing, you send your posing pictures to your coaches, because it's like, that's the evidence on stage. And it was really interesting to see my physique at the leanest physique I ever had in the photo shoot after. And I would see myself just stand there casual, and like, I don't look significantly different from like the last shoot, because my core is just so big naturally. But as soon as you put me into an ab and thigh, it's like, okay, you look shredded. Or you put me into like an actual pose of back double bi, I look big and I look proportioned. Like, those poses bring out the muscle. That's the whole idea.
For you specifically, sorry to cut you off there.
That's okay.
Is the side chest is like, okay, you're straight on back or front double, and okay, you know, you have a wider waist naturally. As soon as you twist in a side chest, it's gone.
Yeah.
And that's insane, actually, to me. And that's why I always say, I think that's my favorite pose of you.
Yeah, it became my favorite pose once I realized, and you called it out a couple of times, you don't have to vacuum. And when I finally did this flat abs, not only was that significantly easier on my transverse, but I was like falling in love with that pose. I was like, okay, that looks way better. And it gives you both size and that kind of low V taper within the hips. So
part of that is you trusting that those abs are going to come in, right? And you're going to get lean enough, because at a higher body fat percentage, you know, the vacuum probably does look better because the abs aren't there. The body fat's too much. But trust the process. Okay, you know, they're going to come in. I'm going to get leaner. I'm going to get my obliques. And as soon as you start to see those come in towards the end of prep, you're starting to fall in love with that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things too, and you address this, like, you want to hit muscle parts a couple times a week. So that was something we made. I usually try to hit everything twice a week, but
Yeah,
when it was lats and hamstrings, I did 3 times a week. And I think it probably made a difference. But I was curious about this because you had said, and I didn't necessarily do full pull-ups every day, but we increased my lats a lot. Why do you feel like an everyday event or every time you're in the gym can actually still, like, do you see that difference in guys? Like, I can see it kind of working, but I was also just worried of overtraining it. So we kept it to 3 days a week. Do
totally,
you
totally.
see, like, if you tell them to do it every day, like, do you still see those benefits that guys still
Yeah,
grow?
and the main part of that is teaching someone to flare their lats, right?
Mm,
Is the main thing, and you see this with a lot of beginners. They have issues flaring their lats in their front relax or in their back pose or any lat spread or anything that involves the lats. It's not natural to really have that mind to muscle connection to it. And that's why I say train pull ups and straight arm pull downs every single day because you're building a better mind to muscle connection with that repetitive motion. Is the main thing. It's not really to do with growth or anything like that. It's more
right.
to build that mind to muscle connection and start to feel your lats working. But that only applies to clients that have that issue. If
Right.
you flare your lats, no issue or anything like that, I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. And that's something I could have even addressed. Is just been like, hey, go in there, but it doesn't have to be a hard set. It doesn't have to be effective
No,
reps, right? It's just to get, and not to mention that I did address the mobility a lot. That was a big
yes.
part of like month 2 where I was like morning stretching, posing, and my lat spread got a lot better. So I think addressing the mobility factor made a big difference on the back for sure. So we got let's keep this flowing because this is really interesting.
Hmm.
The thing I'm curious about, and again, I know it has some different approaches, but I'm curious from like the reps and sets, a volume thing,
Yeah,
because we do want to hit muscle groups multiple times a day or multiple
totally
times a week if we, especially lacking and stuff like that.
possible for
But
sure.
the thing that I see that I don't agree with is when you see really high volume in a prep. It's always about that right volume and near failure, but not complete failure. So I'm
Correct.
curious what kind of a volume approach, and I definitely imagine earlier in the prep, different later in the prep. What
Mhm.
kind of a volume approach do you usually address for most clients? Again, with the context.
For sure. If it's a lacking body part, for sure, 2, 3 times a week with half the volume of a normal workout necessarily.
Right.
So let's say normal workout for arms is 6, 7 sets, or sorry, six or seven exercises. I would just cut that in half.
Right.
Uh, if and then in terms of reps and a number of sets, I usually kind of put them on a progressive overload split. So beginning of prep, we're gonna start with a lot of reps in reserve. So keep the stress low at the beginning of prep for those first few weeks. Is train 4 reps in reserve for each exercise and
Mhm.
build yourself up. So you have 2 or 3 warm-up sets and then 2 working sets.
Nice. Yeah.
Then week 2, 3 reps in reserve. Week 3, 2 reps in reserve. Week 4, we're trained to failure on the last 2 sets. So we're still going to have 2 or 3 sets tapering up to the weight that you're lifting,
Hmm.
but you're going to go to failure on those last 2, or at the worst, 1 in reserve. And
Right.
then we can manage fatigue. And the reason I believe in this is because you're training your body to train like more effectively and have less stress on it, where it's more able to adapt to the stress of training.
Right.
Then we can implement deload weeks throughout the prep if needed.
Yeah, I love that you have that ramp up protocol. Super
Yeah,
imperative that people don't dive into the very first set
totally.
being the most strenuous thing. And the progressive overload using RPE is imperative as well. Like people go into the first week of a program,
Mhm.
90% of people go in the first week of a program. I wouldn't say 90, but a lot of guys who are really trying to go after, it's like, oh, I got to work hard. I got to work hard. There's debilitated sore for the next week. And it's like, you know, when I go in and it's like, you know, it's a deload, or even if it's just been a while since I hit the gym, vacation, COVID is a good example. I touch the weights. Like, it's like, let's wake up the muscle, hit a little bit of everything. And then I see this guy on Instagram, and he's doing a 1 rep max test, and he's like barely fucking, he's jittery. I'm like, you're not going to the gym for the next 2 weeks because
Your central nervous system is fried.
you can't handle that recovery. It's not what you can do physically; it's what you can adapt from. And that reps in reserve, people is like, oh, shouldn't you push hard? It's like, you are pushing hard. Like, you got to understand the physiology is like the body is getting damaged. You are programming it, and then you give yourself a runway where that 3 reps in reserve, 2 reps in reserve. Like, you literally give yourself that progression. And you just find, like, actually when you need to push, you can push. That actually gives you that stepping stone. So I love that progression. It's a really
good like easy data to track, right? Is if you're just going in there and doing whatever sets, whatever reps you want, we have no idea how to manage that fatigue, or if something does happen, we don't know the reason for it. And I track that all with clients' feedback each week in their check-ins, right? Is okay, how's their strength this week? How is their energy? How is their sleep? How is their hunger? Like, their biofeedback.
Yeah, that's a really big thing I put on a lot of my programs now is like I give them RPEs for weekly RPEs, but then I also I ask them to give me RPEs of each workout, and it's been super helpful because, you know, when people are always doing 9, 10 out of 10, 9, and I was like, okay, slow it down. Like, you're not adapting, and these people get hurt, or they even get sick. They get colds. And then versus people who are like, hey, this was a 7, this is an 8, and you see those people get steady progress because they're following the protocol, and it helps so much. And I also love that you kind of had this idea of like how people adapt. And the biggest thing I noticed was, like, at the start of the program, start of the kite, it was, you know, I felt pretty good, and, you know, I did very similar kind of progression. And then when it was like midway, like somewhere around 2 to 3 months in, when you're getting leaner, that's a long time in a deficit. And that's when it was just like, holy shit, just one hard strength day. And you know, there were so many things I was trying to titrate. You know, we talked about the omega-3s, you know, I had more fiber, things like that. But then it was like, no, I think you're training too hard. And so when I just started to find that right RPE where, you know, you're getting they're challenging reps, you know, you're hitting effective reps, it was such a difference, you know, and I needed to know that within the last 4 to 5 weeks. So let's kind of talk about that evolution, because, and just to kind of hit on the calories. So we have a good sense of how you approach that as far as your mesocycles. In that first phase there, you know, we're around like, how do you titrate your calories down? And obviously there's going to be context and feedback, but roughly what's your approach there?
So it's basically is first setting their calories, right? Is I need to have a baseline diet. And I'm not even worried about this first week or 2 of them losing weight or anything like that in their prep. More than likely they will, due to, you know, increased TDEE, increased food quality, and more than likely the calories I'm putting, which is probably just below their maintenance level, is my idea. And how I do that is kind of using a formula. Basically, whatever their weight is, or, you know, and if they're severely overweight, their target weight, times it by 13 or 14. That gives me where their maintenance calorie is roughly, or just below. And then I'm a huge component of high protein. You're going to hear me talk about that tons. And, you know, a couple of reasons is, one is it's the highest thermal effective food. It is most satiating in terms of keeping you full. We need a high amount to maintain muscle mass. And I think it helps tremendously with controlling blood sugar spikes from high carbohydrate meals, which help honestly with cravings.
Yeah.
So usually I kind of put anywhere like 1.1 to 1.4 grams per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
You can argue that's too high. There's tons of things like that, but that's where I find the sweet spot for athletes looking their best.
Absolutely. I just want to point out, like, I call it a protein is the lowest glycemic carb, because basically because that's what it is. Like, we
turns to glucose if needed.
That's what most of the excess is doing. It's going to, all those things you said, and spare the it's sparing it's making sure that your body's going to use the least amount of muscle mass. And then on top of that, it's like, you hear people talking about, oh, the body doesn't use it after so many grams. It's like, it's going to fucking use it, and it's going to use it like as a carbohydrate, and it actually fills you better. So it's like a more satiating carbohydrate. And then, it just turns into carbs and into glucose. So I think like that's not a net negative, right?
No, not at all.
And you did point out something that I don't think a lot of people knew, and I learned recently, was that when you mix even higher glycemic carbs, say white rice, with fiber and protein, it blunts the blood sugar response. It's no different than if you have a shot of liquor by itself, or if you have liquor with food, it's going to slow the digestion. So that's actually another net benefit. So I love that you addressed that.
You can lower your blood sugar. And so at meal after meal, the blood sugar doesn't compound as high.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's brilliant. So I love that. So we got a good protein intake.
Good protein.
You come from just a little bit under the maintenance. How long do you work with? You kind of see how they respond first, and then you adjust their calories every 2 to 3 weeks.
Correct. Every week I look at it, but depending on the client, I may adjust it after week 1. I may adjust after week 2. There's a lot of variables to play into that.
Yeah.
Is such as how much weight do they have to lose? How are they responding to the diet in terms of hunger and energy levels? Right. How are they responding to, maybe they didn't lose weight, right? And how's the mental aspect of that? Is like, are they getting stressed out because the scale didn't change?
Right.
Like, I as a coach wouldn't be maybe worried about that, but the athlete is, and then I got to relay what I'm thinking to them correctly and say, what am I going to tell them not to worry about it and they're still worrying about it? Or should I just actually lower their calories a little bit so we see that scale move just to make them feel more confident?
Yeah, that's a call I've had to make myself recently, where it's just like, okay, I know it's going to move, but they're getting impatient. And so I'm like, okay, let's give it another week. And if you book a call, we'll talk about it. And sure enough, it moves. And even then with that client, you're going to have to talk to them about it. It's like, hey, like, just make sure that we still include like maintenance days, and you don't, because like there's a certain amount of calories that you don't want them to experience, and you need them to be patient anyways, because even if you drop it at 100 calories, it's not that significant. It still takes time. So I love that you addressed that, the psychology of like how people have to handle the weight going up and down. And, you gave me the great strategy of this is your teaspoon or half a teaspoon of salt for the day. Because when people see the weight fluctuation, like it took one drumstick meal where I put way too much garlic salt and it tasted terrible. And then my weight ballooned up for like 5 pounds for at least 3 days. I knew I didn't gain weight, but it's like, fuck, like I want to know how I'm doing. And now I don't know. So like if you just titrate the salt consistently, so you can't have salt, just make it consistent. And so the scale is a big conversation, especially for females. You always have to address that for them. Give patience, right?
Totally. And that's why, with me seeing a lot of my clients in person too, is number one is always how, maybe their skin folds or measurements, how they look in pictures or in person. And the scale is like a third tool.
Yeah, it's tools, and you need to use all of them. The best one is your eyes in person.
Yes.
But you need to use all of them. And I mean, even the person wants some tangible things that they can look at. And it's hard when people are like, oh, I don't like this scale, because you as a coach, you're like, hey, like this is going to be an important tool, and we're going to have to improve the relationship with this, and it's going to take time, but we can improve this. So they're tools. They're not the whole guiding principle, but they're an important tool. My favorite thing I always point out to people, if I try to remember to, is it's more so for lifestyle clients. For a lifestyle client, I'll say, okay, do you have a shirt or a dress or an article of clothing you really want to wear that you don't like wearing right now? Okay. If you don't fit it, don't worry about it. But if you can fit in it, try to fit in it right now. Maybe take a picture with it, but just try to fit it. And we're going to come back to that in 2 months, because that is probably one of the most objective, but still visual cues for people.
Yes.
Because it's like, the scale can be up and down. A tester on skin folds can actually have net negative, or like, problem and errors. But if you fit in clothes, like the clothes aren't changing unless you're going to the dryer and you want to get smaller. So it's like, that's a huge measuring tool for people. It's easy
measurable. It's still measurable to see progress.
Yeah. Belt loops, that kind of stuff. So no, I love that. So now we're let's continue down this evolution. We're about say we're you're seeing the slow progression. You kind of monitor this every week or two. Do you slowly start titrating steps up, and when do you add cardio into this kind of evolution?
Just to finish that, just to touch on carbs and fats as well, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's go detail.
Fats too, like that would be the next thing I set. And this is huge depending on the client's lifestyle, right? And when I say lifestyle, I mean more their career. Is if they have a desk job, like myself, maybe my carbs don't need to be as high compared to a construction worker.
Totally.
And stuff like that. So, fats might be more 0.5 gram per pound of body weight compared to a construction worker weight, which maybe is 0.25, and their carbs are actually skyrocketed.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that has to take into account in terms of setting that. So I usually set fats around 0.3, 0.4, and then the remaining calories come from carbohydrates, whatever is left over.
Right.
And that's where, I learn over the next 2-3 weeks is what I need to adjust is the carbs or fats. I don't really adjust protein.
Right.
But manipulate carbs and fats, and also to take into account rest days versus training days. Is on training days I need to increase carbs, but on rest days I can increase fats, which means they're actually going to be burning more triglycerides and fats on rest days instead of having like glucose in the bloodstream. So you're creating that metabolic flexibility, so they're able to use both as an energy source.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to realize like how satiating and effective fat is for that factor. Like I'm a big fan of encouraging most clients, unless of course you say construction worker, like a high labor job. But for them to experience the protein and fat in the morning, we talked about this in my prep, like it makes a big difference. Like, and there's still always going to be like, exceptions and people who are super carb tolerant.
Yes.
But most of the people who are super carb tolerant aren't seeking out to get a nutrition and training coach. So it's like, because, and it's true. Like if you do these glucose tolerance tests, that basically you eat something, it would be a Pop-Tart, and I've heard them talk about the Pop-Tart test. So they take Pop-Tart, you eat it, and they see what your glucose level does. And some people, it'll just come up almost like it's a lower glycemic. Like you got to remember, like everything is on a spectrum of information for people. So when, someone says like, white rice or a Pop-Tart is high glycemic, it's like, yes, it is, but that doesn't mean it hits everyone the exact same way. So someone could have a Pop-Tart and maybe their blood sugar comes up a bit. And then me, it's like, well, up and down. Yeah. You're going to get hungry in a half hour here. And so like
all about sensitivity.
Yeah. And there's both a lifestyle factor that adds up to that, but there's also a genetic component that people are just more carb sensitive. And when you start to get people to play around with protein and fat more earlier in the day, even if it's protein, fat, and carbs, but you put that fat and protein in there too. We mentioned this is going to slow digestion. It's going to blunt that response. And as you mentioned, especially when you have a desk worker, you don't want to fuck around with your glucose levels in your head. Actually, it's better to be more metabolically flexible. That you don't necessarily have to be keto to have a benefit of ketosis benefits of just having steady fat in your blood tissue. So I love that approach, especially when people are on rest days. Like it's a good time for them to maybe experience that. But yeah, and I was also curious. I think we'll probably talk about it in probably the next phase. But like, what's your sign for refeeds?
Few things. One is always look. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to do in any sort of fat loss phase is not only lose fat, but maintain muscle. And that's the number one goal there is if I'm getting the client to lose fat, but they're losing a lot of muscle along with it, I'm actually doing them a disservice, not only to their look that they're having on stage, but their metabolic health, their long-term health, and overall gym performance as well.
Right.
So look is number one. Is if I'm seeing them actually, I want to be flat. I'm fine with the client being flat, but I'm not fine with them actually having atrophy, right? Is if I find their physique is getting smaller or their lean body mass is going down tremendously, or their weight has dropped tremendously, and I know that we can't lose that much fat in that short amount of time, especially when the calorie deficit they're in, that's when I'll implement refeeds.
And you're tracking this through skin folds to try to see the fat mass to lean mass ratio.
Their lean body mass through skin folds, measurements, everything like that.
What kind of ratio do you look for in that? Because I've seen that in myself, and in like, you're gonna see some lean mass loss, and you're gonna see
Yes.
like you want predominantly, but what's the ratio that you think is a bad sign?
Honestly, I don't have a ratio. I'm open to hearing about if you have one. But I honestly just look for every time I do their skin folds, which is normally every couple weeks, ideally, is that we're not losing more than on our formula,
Like half?
like half. Yeah.
Yeah, that was roughly what
Yeah.
I looked at. Like, is it's 2/3. Ideally, it's only a quarter, but when you're going
Totally.
through a lot of stress, it's just going to be hard. But like, if you see it, and I've seen it in clients before, where it's like, actually, I saw one guy who did a competition, and he came in and he's like, it was like a fat loss competition I was running, and then he had done all this running, and he's like, he didn't strength train, but he ate in a calorie deficit and just ran a bunch. And I was like, okay, so and the whole thing was lose gain. So I told people you had to like maintain muscle mass or improve it, and he lost like 19 pounds. 4 pounds was fat from the measurements. And so it's like, well, we can say that if it's more than 50%, there's something we're not addressing. If your protein's high, okay, what else are you doing? And I've had another client where he was actually doing additional running, and he's strength training 5 days a week and trying to do additional runs. And I'm like, okay, I don't mind you running, but why put yourself into a carb catabolic state that we could do on a different day when you're also doing strength training that day and you're in a calorie deficit? Like, that's going to be too much stress in the system. So to me, that's how I kind of use that formula. If it's more than 50%, and there might be other reasons for it, but if it's more than 50%, it's probably a bad sign of the trend that you're having.
Correct. There's something that's missing. It's either you're training too much, you're eating too little protein, you're too stressed, or not enough sleep. There's something in there that's off, and you need to address that like ASAP to prevent that.
Yeah, and as much as you want to lose the weight, you got to be actually smart with how you're losing the weight. And it's big ones. Even sleep is like the other one. It's like as soon as you talk to someone, oh yeah, and I'm sleeping well. It's like, okay, well, that might just be why people don't lose the weight, right? It's like they're just getting, and then that there's more stress, right? So yeah, a very, very good notion there. So great sense there how the nutrition is kind of starting and evolving, and so do you kind of keep basically? You're looking at 3 months of adjustments progressing into, and as we had talked about, and how I did just talking with you and my coach was about that 4 to 5 week mark out is when you level them up. Is that kind of fair?
By level up, like you mean go more aggressive?
Aggressive in the diet. Like for the most part, we're looking at a pretty healthy weight loss for the first 12 weeks. And then because like you could approach most clients, most general pop with that approach, maybe just a bit more training, maybe a bit more steps. But for the most part, 3/4 of the prep is extremely healthy. And then you level up.
Especially with beginning clients or beginning competitors or novice competitors, whatever the word you want to use, is because if you go too aggressive at the beginning, is that they burn out or they can't stick to it or they can't adhere to the diet or the training. You need it to be realistic. And it's a lot easy mentally for a beginner to say, I can suffer or go really hard for 4 or 5 weeks, not 16.
Right. Yeah. No, it was substantially easier for me. I did 13 weeks of a severe deficit. And I mean, I'd say the last bit I got used to it, but it was like 3/4 of the prep. I was just like, man, this is so much easier, and I'm getting most of the same results.
I even saw that with you coming to see me weekly for posing is at the first 3/4 of the prep, you're upbeat, super happy, super easy to talk to, and very lively. Towards the end, not saying you're miserable at all, but you would see a shift in your energy levels.
Right. Yeah.
It's completely normal to see. Those last few weeks, you're a little bit more tired. We didn't have as deep conversations, and that's fine because you don't have the energy to do it.
Yeah, you're challenging yourself metabolically, and it's just. It's something you have to have. That's where we talked about being psychologically ready for these things, and I also imagine, just to roughly talk about it, we don't talk too much details, is like enhanced versus non-enhanced.
Totally.
Right. So like when you're talking about enhanced, they could even manage doing more like stressful things, like,
Of course.
you know, I'm not sure how much your experience is that you want to talk about it, but with like, just with like the enhanced, like it is such a substantial difference what your body can take as
Totally.
far as stress on the system, and still having energy and to recover. Like that's the main thing you're doing is recovering,
Totally.
right?
Totally. The main thing with taking PEDs is the recovery aspect, and you have armor over your muscle to prevent that from being lost.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Is an easy way to think about it is, you know, you can go in a little bit more of a more aggressive deficit. You can do a little bit more what's the right word here? Aggressive cardio and training,
Hmm.
because you're not so worried about losing lean body mass, and your recovery is quicker because all those hormones are elevated from other what's the right word here? Sources, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and compared to a natural athlete, as soon as we do put someone in a deficit, we see a lot of those hormones actually on the trend downwards.
Right. And I love how you call it that. It's a great description, armor. Like
Yeah,
it's just like you're giving these things that are protective of it. And
correct.
man, I would have loved to have armor on, like 10 pounds of the mass that I lost over this.
Totally.
But you know, that's the risk reward of doing the enhanced. But no, and so like that makes sense. Now again, I know this is gonna be, it's always gonna depend. What's your sign for I need this client to do cardio, and when does it typically happen? For like, you know, because there was a time where you were starting to encourage it more with me, and I was trying to be patient with my knee because, you know, my knee's not terrible, but it did take, you know, way more torture throughout this near the end. Probably could have started a bit sooner, but what's your sign that you want them to start going into utilizing cardio more?
Great. I'm always going to have cardio in the plan, no matter what. If it's a building phase, if it's early in prep, if it's late in prep, I'm a huge component of cardio
Hmm.
because, you know what, number one, I think it's great for heart health and in terms of cardiovascular support to allow you to train harder. So
Absolutely.
that's a huge thing. Is, you know what, even if you're in a bulking phase and you're trying to put on size, still get your cardio in because your training is going to be more efficient.
Yeah,
In
people
terms
don't.
of,
I
oh,
just
sorry,
want
go
to address
ahead.
that because that's such a good point. People need to
Yeah.
understand that even if you're in a bulking phase, like
Yes.
people are afraid of, oh, it's gonna, you know, ruin my gains. It's like no.
Yeah.
Like, first off, like more and more research coming out that it's not a thing, but it's even more important is the research that shows that when you do like some good zone 2 cardio, maybe you fit it, like hit will kind of be a little bit more challenging, but your zone 2 cardio is what's going to allow you to do another set quicker, better. And you know, even if you're doing powerlifting, like, you know, the old West Side Barbell, like they would get guys to do prowler, like they would get guys to do more like endurance things
Mhm.
so that their recovery, because they're doing 2 to 5 minute rests, well, their circulatory systems are doing the recovery. So I
Yes.
love that you address that people don't realize that cardio is still a part of the equation. Even if you hate it, it's like it's still going to be a part of health. And
It's
I'm
going to be a huge benefit. And if you hear someone say, you know, I'm in a bulking phase and I'm not going to do cardio, or I'm not going to do cardio because I don't want to lose muscle or lose my gains,
yeah.
it's not that. They're being fucking lazy.
Totally, and or they just don't realize that there's
Yeah.
actually internally health there, right? So
Totally.
I
Totally.
think it's a big thing. But yeah, so keep going with that. You're saying you always have it in there.
Always have it in there. And then, you know what, I like to balance nutrition and cardio, right? Is those are kind of your two levers to pull in terms of fat loss. I'm either going to lower the calories or I'm going to increase their expenditure. So
Right.
depending on the client and how much they are active in a day. For instance, let's use my client Yannick, who you know for an example. Is at one point he was working full time and everything like that, and I had his cardio pretty moderate, his calories pretty low, but that he was losing fat and making progress. And then he, you know, switched jobs and was off for a couple of weeks. I actually was like, hey, you know what, we're going to see a significant decrease in his expenditure throughout the day. So I had two options. I could have either lowered his calories more, which again could go into potentially too big of a deficit that we would see muscle loss, or, you know what, even his metabolism adapt too much that we have nowhere to go in the future weeks. So my decision was to increase his cardio, so his step count was to keep the same activity as he was if he was working full time.
Yeah, that makes, I always say go up before you go down, right? Like
Correct.
increase the output before you decrease the calories, because that's what's going to
Correct.
affect your recovery and just your mind. So
Totally.
when you're looking at cardio, do you have a protocol of how many days a week, or is it a daily habit, same thing every day?
It's depends on when the client can do it in their schedule is one
Mhm.
thing. Is if they're able to do it fasted every morning, I like to keep it 6, 7 days a week.
Mhm.
Why I say that is not only for the fat loss benefit, but for routine benefit.
Yeah, I think the
If
routine is huge in the morning.
huge. If it's a client that isn't able to do it in fasted due to their schedule, and they're doing most training, I just do it post training, but maybe they're doing more minutes in those sessions.
Right,
So
right.
you don't have them necessarily going to the gym just for a cardio session, maybe until the end. But I think it's good to get out of the gym for those 1 or 2 days.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And like, I mean, you could look at like the total volume that you're doing it, and then just
Right.
like, get the person like, oh, I'd love to not go to the gym Saturday, Sunday. Okay, well, instead of the 7:45s, we do a few more hours, and
Correct.
as long as you're getting the total volume. And I love that you still track steps, because that, like, I was talking to someone else recently, and I'm like, that's such vital information. Like, we just talked about the difference between a sedentary worker and a construction worker. Like, that is a good chunk of your metabolism. It can be as much, if not more, or significantly less than your exercise daily. So you got to address that. And
Yeah.
that was like most of my cardio was just step
Yeah.
counting, right? And it was pretty incredible that 3/4 of the prep, I did not sweat very much, and I got in the leanest physique that I had. And so it's like, it's actually really nice, because then you can just fit it in. When I was, teaching people boxing, I was like, I'm going to walk all around this fucking room today. I'm going to accumulate 40 steps, and I did 4,000 steps, and I did. And it's just like, it just makes you a more active person, realizing that it can fit in your
It's
life.
easy
So,
to do, less stress, and even coming back to what we were talking about, natural versus enhanced. Natural athletes list cardio the best
yeah.
because you're able to continue to burn calories without diving into muscle tissue.
Mhm.
Compared to an enhanced athlete, we can do a little bit maybe more hit training because again they have that armor.
Yeah, yeah, and like I was talking to someone who had done their cardio recently, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna try to go, 140, 100, probably if I were to guess, they're 140, 150 beats per minute, doing the
Mhm.
step climber for an hour." And I'm just like, "Oh my God, all I'm thinking about is your carbs. Like, you're
Oh,
using your carbs, and it's just like you're also just depleting your mind and when I did incline walking, I was probably around 120 to 130, sometimes 140 in the first cut, but like my legs never fucking recovered for 3 months.
yeah,
And so, like, how good were my strength days, right? and
totally.
and and then, like, I always say, like, I took twice the time to make it twice as easy, because if I yes, that 45 minutes of cardio definitely burnt more calories,
Mhm.
but if I do 90 minutes of walking, and it's actually probably pretty close to the amount of calories, it might take me twice the time, but I have more carbs, and it's just predominantly fat, and I think that is
Correct.
valuable, right? So
Correct.
no,
Correct.
I like that. So now, let's talk about the hard cut. So,
Okay.
okay, because I think that we covered most of that stuff in there, and then we're at the point where you might titrate them down a little bit.
Hmm.
Let's say you got a client like myself, you titrated me down. How low do you think that roughly would have kind of gone? Like, do you think you almost have a perspective of like, okay, eventually I want this guy to, you see how they're working,
Mhm.
and you kind of take it down, 100 to 200 at a time to make sure you're seeing the weight loss rate. And then
Mhm.
around week 5, week 6, or sorry, week 5 or week 4 out is when you're
Mhm.
like, let's go into it.
So into and at that point, it I'm very science driven, very science based.
Mm-hmm.
But around that time, in terms of how low your calories can get, all that kind of gets thrown out the window, in my opinion, because you know what, it's real life at that point, or it's that specific person is metabolic adaptation can be so adapted that I'm fine with going below your BMR. I'm fine with going
Mm-hmm.
below. Dangerously low calories for such a short period of time for a given goal. And this is where bodybuilding becomes unhealthy, is where we've taken a very healthy approach 3 quarters of prep. The last quarter, it does get unhealthy because we have a specific body fat that we need to get down to. And if I need to take you to 1,000 calories, to 1,100 calories, I'll do it.
Right. And like you hit something on the head that I learned every single time I did first prep and this prep. The body's adaptable. You know, people cannot eat for a month and still exist. And so like as shitty as it is, it's like at this point, it's like this is what you're in for. And you did everything. You started along out for a reason. And you know, I think like the one good thing was within my evolution was like we eventually took your advice, but I eased into that progress, which I think I needed to. I actually felt worse in the 1,600 calories. The start of 14 was really tough, but I felt worse when I did 1,600 calories than when I went to 1,400. And for, you know, so many reasons that it could be, but like just the steady progression into that, it could be training, it could be sleep. And then eventually it was like I was doing 1,400 calories. And then it was so crazy how after in week 2 that of 1,400 calories, so it was a week out and I was doing that peak week there, where I was like, hammer down, let's go. And then adrenaline hits. And then I was like, all the hit cardio that I thought I didn't want to do that you recommended, I was like, I'm fucking doing it. And I was just like, holy shit, you can fucking push yourself.
You can push.
You can push. Like your body's capable of a lot. Your mind's capable of a lot. Like I did I put boxing in my workout. Like I went hard. And when you actually are willing to get over this, you learn how to not get caught up in your feeling when you're in this, because you're going to feel tired. Getting out of a chair sucks, you know? And it was like, but when I had that peak week, it was my best week because I actually just kind of completely push emotions aside. You're so driven by adrenaline and excitement, you can't even pay attention to it. So I think I totally understand that approach. What was interesting from your difference from AJ's experience was AJ had a client go too hard in a cut. And so from his experience with a former client of how hard they went and they didn't get the result they want. So he was super apprehensive with me. And like, you know, I was trying to guide him to, he's like, I can push, not to mention, I'm not her. Like I don't lose fat very easy, you know, like I'm not doing all these other things she's doing. So it was good that you gave us that recommendation, because we otherwise wouldn't have pushed. We didn't know how much we needed to push because my body, we had not seen that trajectory of my physique. So I think that's really cool that you've like, how many years have you been doing this as a prep coach?
Going on, yes, 3 years is really taking on prep clients, really.
And you've seen the transformations.
I've seen the transformation and how hard you can actually push a client, and it's very dependent. And like you brought up a really good point, how adapted the metabolism is or a body is. Like for instance, this prep, I had a client that was eating over 6,000 calories for a lot of the prep, and we couldn't even gain weight at that. Like we were having a hard time gaining a pound a week at that point. And towards the end of his cut, he's eating, I have to go back into my notes here, but I believe he was at 2,000 calories, if not 1,800. I think I put him down to, and we needed that to continue to lose body fat. Wow. So like, think of that difference, 6,000 calories to 1,800 in 16 weeks.
Was this an enhanced client?
No, it was not actually. It was actually a natural client. A very gifted and specimen client, but not an enhanced client.
How big is he?
We would have been around 170 to 180 pounds throughout the whole prep. Probably got up to like 185 actually.
That's fucking insane. And like, this is what amazes me about calories and metabolism. Like, that's why I always say these metabolic equations are always on a spectrum, because I routinely hear people eating way more calories than me that I'm bigger than. And it's just like, yeah, metabolism is relative. Like, it so depends on the client. What do they do for a living? What's their job?
Actually was kind of a couple jobs to it. One was labor, and then one was very, very easy.
Well, but like the labor makes a difference, but like 6,000 calories still, that's a hell of a metabolism.
At high calories during both jobs too.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was adaptive because of that, and we have to add cardio towards that because the metabolism adapted so much to each cut or each cut of calories.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
no,
Okay, I would put him cut his calories. Okay, his body's in a deficit. Then his body outsmarts me, and then I'm trying to outsmart the body. That's the thing is, as a prep coach, is you're trying to stay one step ahead of the body.
yeah, yeah. You're trying to understand it, and there's such a relative difference. I think that's a big thing is I've already learned from how we did our prep different was I didn't do much of a feel out stage at the start. We went 2,000 calories and just wrote it out. Now it worked pretty decently,
Totally.
but I probably could have gotten to know the body better, and it would have been maybe it could have been a bit more muscle sparing. If we would have titrated it down, gone from, instead of 2,700 or 3,000 calories down to, well, let's start at 2,300 and be consistent. And then, okay, we're hitting this plateau. Okay, go back down to 2,000. And it could have actually given me better recovery. But, it's one of those, readdress.
That's why, sorry to interrupt you again.
Okay.
But is that the primer phase I was talking about is so important. And working with someone for an extended period of time is because I'll be able to make those changes a lot easier.
Right.
And know a person's body instead of just going into a deficit right away and not knowing exactly where I should start.
Yeah, just completely assuming it, right? You actually need that.
Yeah.
You need that assessment phase, and it's
that's
funny because I do it with my personal clients. I call it the metabolic test, and I get them to do it, but I didn't do it with myself because I just thought I knew it was going to work.
Totally. And that's why even one thing I did post show. I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but is I went back and looked at every single client's prep. And I wrote out, a page of notes on each client and say, I wish I should have done X, Y, and Z at this phase, or, in the peak here, I wish I would have done this. Like stuff, no matter the results are amazing for each client placing top 3, but I can always get better, right?
Yeah, you want to address it for them, and they want to know that.
And I'm complete transparency with each client, and I had that in their post show meeting is, okay, as your coach, I probably should have done this better, or this changes in your prep. If we're going to do another prep together, this is why I did this information, so we have it to improve next time. And it's not I don't know what the right reason. I'm full transparency is like if I make a mistake or think something could be better, I'm open talking about it because we're learning.
Yeah. No, I'm going to be asking you to give me my criticisms here shortly. I want to go through the a bit more the depletion phase and stuff like that, and then we'll talk about like the whole evolution there. So, and I want the honesty, so I like it. So we're depleting. When you think about when you're at this point, and this is something I heard recently in someone's protocol, is that like they had said within that 4 to 5 weeks out, is already kind of trying to actually deplete. And that's something I didn't do that probably could have been different was I kept my reps, 8 to 10, less 12 to 15 if it's like a smaller muscle. But I actually just didn't want to overly stress. I just wanted to hit a strength stimulus. I tried to make it adaptable. If, I could see that I was not recovering much, I would kind of dial it down. We actually had a bit of a mini taper prior to peak week, and I think that was possibly a mistake, but I felt good. Like I actually got adapted to the 1400 really well because of it. I just felt like when I depleted and doing the high reps, like I didn't feel very depleted. Like I actually felt pretty good, which, I would just, one of the things I talked to AJ about, I'm like, do you absolutely need to deplete other than like going low calories for like the 4 to 5 weeks? I'm not arguing that, but like how big of a difference does depletion make when you don't totally deplete all the carbs, but then you eventually bring the carbs up? Like how big of an impact is that on someone's physique?
That's a great question. And there's so many contradicting science or coaches' approaches to it. The depletion route is kind of old school thought process or old school bodybuilding. Is okay, deplete all the muscle of no glycogen, less than 50 grams of carbs per day, high reps, especially during peak weeks, so you can super concentrate the muscle, or super saturate, I should say, the muscle with carbohydrates in the load.
Yeah.
Thought process behind it. And that's what I do with majority of my clients. And especially if they're in shape, I'm willing to do that. The one thing during the depletion phase is you have to really be careful about is doing the same exercises that you've done all prep, and at same sets, same kind of intensity, but not really adding in too many variables, because then you're what am I saying here? You're basically, you don't want to break down muscle tissue.
Right.
Is the biggest thing. Is you want to keep everything else consistent other than increasing the reps to get the depletion going or get the glycogen out of the muscle. You don't want to add in any
crazy new things, not a lot of things.
exactly.
And I'll tell you from like one of the best things that AJ mentioned that I think made a huge impact, because they were still hard workouts, but actually making as many things concentric made such a difference. So I would do like a single leg press and I made it concentric, and it was like, fuck, I'm hitting effective reps. But then the next day I was like, did I do it? It's that it's not about muscle damage, it's about the muscle stimulus. And it's like, I kind of feel it. It was like, wow, I probably could have done like a better depletion phase longer, knowing that I could have recovered that much better just from simply taking out of that eccentric loading and having just a pause, just making it so you pause between reps and you unload the weight. So like I'd say 90% of my exercises were unloaded. I could still get a pump. It was still a good workout, but having that little unloading process made such a difference for like my body to be able to recover. Like you say, getting rid of that eccentric stress. And you had made a great point, even within the nutrition. And the same thing goes for exercise, is like, don't change a lot. Like this is like, we're just trying to peak, but that doesn't mean that we're like, okay, let's fucking, do a whole bunch of different things. It's like, ideally this is just the icing on the cake, right? Like, or cherry on the icing. Like everything else should actually be mainly the same. Put a little bit more icing around the top, but that's it. So I love that you address that.
Totally. And that's what's, peak week isn't magic. What we talked about on a previous podcast with AJ is, we need to be in shape before peak week. If you're not in shape before peak week, we're already screwed for the show.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We're not going to be able to bring your best physique in for that.
Yeah. Well, so quickly, I want to dive into, because I don't want to take too much more of your time here. You gave me a timeline, and this is an important question, and that is my physique, your criticisms, things that you think went well. You got to see me front stage there, and I got great results out of most of them. And I'd just love to hear your feedback.
I think you did extremely well, because you got 3 first places and 1 third. Am I correct by saying that?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I put you in one of my posts the other day, and I rewatched one of your reels, no joke, probably like 10 times, because like, okay, I gotta make sure these places are right.
Yeah.
And then I was like, literally an hour later, they post the results online. I was like, could I just look there? But I think you did really well. I only saw you actually on stage once.
Okay, yeah.
To be completely honest, I wish I saw you more, but like we talked about at the beginning, 15 athletes going back and forth, and one thing I really wish they did for the coaches this year is we're able to go through the side door. I'm not sure if you noticed that at all.
Yeah.
I had to run up the stairs, run downstairs. Like it took me another 5 minutes to get backstage of going the long way.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, you obviously walked away with a tremendous hardware.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just need to continue to add more muscle and fix any sort of imbalances that you have of left to right side.
Yeah.
And then increase basically a balance of up to lower bottom. So I think we need to actually make your upper body bigger to match your legs.
Yeah, I was going to say shoulders and lats. Like, I mean, the lats lats are pretty good, but they can still come up. But my shoulders for sure.
Mobility for sure.
Yeah.
And I think you can get leaner. Is my honest opinion.
You can almost get leaner.
is everyone can get leaner, but why I say this is, looking back at your first show when we competed together, you weren't in shape compared to this past weekend.
Yeah.
And you never really, I don't want to say suffered, but got down to sub, let's say 10% body fat or sub 6% body fat. Again, once your body has done that, it's able to do that again easier.
Yeah.
I would honestly really encourage you to do another show within the next 1 to 3 years for sure.
Yeah.
And with the expectation, with the plan to do a national show after.
I think that's something I was going to consider. Like, if you're going to do it, like, it would be really cool to pursue like a pro card or something like that. Like, just, or even get that experience. And if you make all that work, and then if you know that it's like a short period after, and
Totally.
it's not like talking about going into the fall or something like that. Like, you just keep the momentum.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a logical thing. And the posing itself. How
Yes.
did you feel about that? Is there things that I kind of need to work on, like mobility for sure?
Mobility number one is it. I think your posing was really, really good. I love honestly all your poses. I can't nitpick any of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Front lat
just
spread.
front lats, yeah. Sorry, I should that one
And that improved. That improved
major
substantially.
improvement. Major
Yeah.
improvement. I'm just thinking of all your poses in my head. That one, I think we need to front lat spread, and I still think we can get a better classic pose.
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, I agree.
And you know what? I'm seeing that same issue with my client that I'm taking to Toronto, Ben. Is it's hip mobility.
Yeah.
Is both of you guys are very stiff.
Yeah.
So even with you doing this pose and everything like that, we need a better tilt in the hips or in the pelvis.
Yeah.
And that's something, you know what, is genetic, but also we just need to work on.
You can work on it. The guy who beat me in second in classic, I feel like that might have been the pose he beat me on, because when you see the guys backstage, most of the time you know where you're going to place, right? And so I knew Josh was very likely going to take it. And then, and so I was just hoping to make him sweat. I was going to go out there, pose my heart out. And then that guy got second place. And I was kind of surprised, but like, I knew my aesthetic also has a hard time even looking lean in classic with those shorts and the whole symmetry. But I saw one of his poses that was like a classic physique pose, and I'm like, oh man, he does I think he outposed me. Because he had really narrow hips, so he had the genetics for that. But he like you said, it was that slant that he had, and he was able to like way smaller legs. But he almost made the legs look like a good thing to there, right? So he actually used it as an
illusion, because his waist is so small that his lips look bigger. So his arms look bigger, his legs look bigger because his waist is so tiny genetically. And he's a great poser. The guy you lost to, Josh, he's actually the one who helped me with posing back in the day.
Wow. Yeah. No, he loves his posing. He loves his sport.
He has that passion for posing. Like, I have the passion for nutrition, for competing, or for stuff like that. I like posing. Don't get me wrong. It's part of the sport. I like it, but you're not going to catch me practicing routines just for fun.
Yeah, that makes me feel better, because I think that was like the most hardest part of the prep. It's like I mentally didn't want to do it, but I started to fall in love with it more with your help, with understanding and seeing the symmetry. I saw the art form of it, and I think once you get that muscle memory down too, you can even do it more efficiently. Like I spent a lot of time on it, and I would probably make it a narrower window, and I could still enjoy it a bit more. But so I love that feedback, super helpful. The thing I would love to know your feedback on is reverse dieting, because this is something that I didn't do well last time. We talked about it mildly. So what I'm really still just trying to figure out for myself is like, what is the right stage progression? Like, how long? Because I've heard of guys talking about making it 4 months, 6 months. And I just have a bit of a perspective. I did 1,800 calories, probably a higher calorie average because the weekend I treated myself last weekend. But this week I'm at 2,000 calories, even thinking of bringing it up more, trying to be a little bit closer, but like almost like bring up your calories more and keep the activity high, so your body is able to build, but you're able to burn. You actually create a better G-flex that way. So how do you kind of guide your clients into, and how long do you take that reverse diet?
So reverse diet, I honestly don't think ever ends, to be honest. If you can make that argument that you should stick on some sort of nutrition plan always post-show. And depends on the client. So it depends on what they have planned in terms of cheat meals, meals with family, outings, everything like that, because they have just given 16 to 20 weeks of straight compliance. So you have to do that. I think getting someone to maintenance level as quick as possible is the smartest idea, because it lowers the chance of them binging, because they actually have enough calories to be happy at or to feel full at. Also, to even putting on muscle in the reverse diet, I'm a strong believer you can put on as much muscle as a natural athlete as someone on gear in a reverse diet.
Yeah, body's
Because
just
your body
hungry
is
for
such
it.
a dry sponge and your hunger is through the roof.
Yeah.
I honestly wouldn't mind touching on that subject on our next thing. I gotta log off pretty soon.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I don't want to cut you off, but I would love to, touch on a lot more subjects next week if you're willing to have me on, or the week after.
Absolutely. No, we had so much. We got so much more we can talk about. We can talk about building and all that stuff. So let's book another call. I appreciate you coming on here. I don't want to take any more time. Time flew by. Like I was like,
totally.
We're already
I know. I just looked down. I just got the reminder about my next call.
Yeah, no worries. I don't want to take any more time. This is a great chat, and I'm going to take you out to lunch too, like lunch or supper, because like I just have to personally thank you so much. You made such an impact for me. Last time I look at those photos, you've seen them, like it made such an impact, and I'm so grateful. So we're gonna have to have some drinks sometime. I really appreciate everything you did for me.
We should even do a dinner and then plan out just an informational podcast too, that we can do a presentation or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's do that. Okay. Thanks so much for coming on, Brett.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much to Brett. I really, really appreciate that conversation. It was a lot of fun. I could have kept chatting with him for 2 hours, and that's why we're going to do a follow-up, because the reverse diet's actually really important to talk about. There's even more things we can talk about. We talk about supplements. We can talk about other protocols, dive more into how I went about mine and where he would have shifted and changed. And I wanted to be more open to how he does his progressively. And then we can dive more details of like laying out plans. And we can also make this not just bodybuilding oriented. As we had mentioned, the first 3/4 of a prep should be a healthy cut. It should be very realistic. The only extra thing that you're doing is more posing. And we didn't even get to dive as much into that as he was my posing coach. We didn't get to dive into that as much as I wanted to, but I wanted to fit in so much within the time that we had there. And it's just a lot of really cool information, because, the way that you can look at this is that NASCAR is like the ultimate way to have the fastest, most explosive car on the track. So NASCAR people know engines inside and out. And that's, it's an extreme, but they do know how to treat their cars really well. And so bodybuilding is the NASCAR of treating your car well, right? So if you have a car and you really appreciate it, you still can learn from what the people talk about when they're talking about engines and motors and treating things well. So it's super valuable to appreciate so many of these little things and details that we want to optimize. And if you notice, we kept talking about not causing too much stress. Like that's actually super imperative in someone's fat loss. Even if you're not trying to do a show, even if you just want to be in the best shape of your life, like we want to make that as easy as possible to do something that's really hard. That's the best way you got to look at it. If you're going to do something really hard, make it as simple and easy as possible, because it's going to be hard. We don't want the hardest path to the hard thing. We want the simplest, most efficient and effective path to do that. Super efficient and effective path to do the hard thing. And that's what you can get when you have a really good coach. And my favorite part of his conversation was how many times he says it depends, and you try to play to the client, and you got to look at these things that a client can do well. So super informative, a lot of great information. And, I'm going to go back and listen to this episode right after, so I can go over all these highlights, because I thought I was just caught up in conversation. And sometimes that happens on the podcast. Sometimes I'm trying to more formulate questions, but there was so much good conversation with Brett there. So we're definitely going to have him on again. We'll dive into a part 2. We're going to go more in depth on some of the little details, especially like I say, about how we can, still even address this on an overarching, if you're just someone trying to lose body fat, we want to make sure that, you can use some of these tools and tactics. It doesn't have to be all the extreme stuff that we talk about. So I hope you learned a lot in this episode. As I said, stay tuned for part 2, because it's going to be more details, and the reverse side is actually extremely imperative. I say this as a former yo-yo diet, as a yo-yo dieter, as someone who binges, as someone who has a hard time controlling their appetite, is that the reverse diet is where you get long-term benefits. The reverse diet is where you make this really hard thing then later on feel easier in that progress, because you can develop really bad habits from doing this stuff. And that's what happened with me in my first prep. And so what you want to do is you want to go through an evolution like this, whether it's a bodybuilding show or just your own fat loss progress. And then you want to consider the reverse diet so that you sustain the results, so that you become a different person on the other side. And the way Brad said was perfect. Reverse diet never really ends. You're actually just evolving your diet into slightly more calories, improve your metabolism, and then you actually get to sustain these results. And then you can look at what else you want to build, what else you want to do with your physique or your fitness. So I'm really excited for that episode. We're definitely going to dive into that. And so stay tuned for that. But with, again, a lot to learn. And as always, like, subscribe. Please share this podcast so it gets out there more. I think that's what's most valuable to me. I really appreciate any of the reviews. That helps me a ton. But if you know people that are really interested in this stuff and understanding how, the nutrition and training all comes together, you're listening to people who are absolute nerds about it. There's a lot to learn in this episode, so you can share this with them, and hopefully they can really have more education on this, because this is really solid information I wish I knew, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, definitely before my last prep. And I think, I hope that you also learned a great deal, because we want to keep that ambition going, right? I said it earlier in the podcast, and, I'm always going to say it. We want to chase this ambition with a happy mindset, because that's where you are your best self, is when you are pursuing things to make you the best version of yourself. So I hope this podcast helped you with that, because it's not about the pursuit of happiness. It's the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.